One of the things I was learning when I became a mom was that even though your children come through you, right, they are not of you. Your children are not an extension of you. They come through you. And that is something that I want to think about, whether it's with my children, who I love very much, a project, which are like a child in some ways. That's why I said it's your baby. My project came through me, but is not of me, right? I may be able to offer a personality or a certain aspect of it, but I don't actually feel like it just belongs to me alone. Like it comes through me. And so like, how do I not suffocate it by trying to control this project or control my children, which will make everybody very miserable, but ensuring that I am allowing something to come through me and I'm caring for it in a way that allows it to still express itself in its most authentic form. So that's how I think about founder syndrome, is when you start trying to control things because it is your baby, it's your passion project, it was your idea. But yeah, honoring that idea of understanding that if the idea came through you, it's not of you.
This is Social Justice Origin Stories. I'm your host, Rolando Tompkins Jones. Social Justice Origin Stories is a storytelling project that highlights personal stories and defining moments that have inspired individuals and organizations to labor for equity and social justice. Through truth-telling, the honest sharing of their experiences, storytellers teach us about themselves, enabling us to learn about ourselves and our world through their stories. By reconnecting with pivotal moments of activation in their lives, they invite us to do the same. At Social Justice Origin Stories, we believe that there's power in storytelling and lived experience is experience. There's room enough for all of us to do this work. There are many ways to contribute, and our contributions don't need to be the same. We can enter and remain engaged in the work using the gifts that are special to us while supporting others and using theirs. We have the capacity to grow and change for the better when exposed to new information and experiences. We believe in our inherent worth and capabilities, and we possess the power to inspire and create change within ourselves and others. We can transcend the confines of the status quo to imagine and design more equitable and humanizing systems. So today on Social Justice Origin Stories, we have a wonderful friend of mine, Jouapag Lee, with us today. Hi, Jopa. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Rolando. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm really excited.
Oh, I'm so happy that you're here. I really appreciate you jumping on to be a part of this with me.
I identify myself as a leader, a facilitator, and an advocate for social justice, healing, and liberation. Another really important part of my identity and how I think about myself is I'm the oldest daughter of refugee and immigrant Hmong parents. I grew up really supporting my family, navigating a lot of different systems in the United States that were really unfamiliar to them. And these experiences led me to a strong sense of social justice and equity, and led me to dedicating my life towards undoing systems of oppression. One of the things that I'm really passionate about right now and really passionate about working on is my platform called the Healing Timelines Project, which
Okay.
I launched in 2023. And the goal that I have with that project is to offer trauma informed resources and a justice lens to spirituality, and offering healing resources to help Hmong descendants overcome multi generational pattern and thrive. So I loved that you called to this social justice origin stories, because it made me look back and reflect on like, how did I get here?
Mm,
Never wildest dreams did I think that I would be on Instagram offering resources to folks around intergenerational trauma and healing, and also doing that in my special way, which is like offering a justice lens to our healing. A lot of that journey started in undergrad. At the time, probably would not have identified myself as a student organizer. I didn't even have the language for that. All I knew was that what happened to me when I was an undergrad was that I was harassed while walking home from campus. And it was one of those scary, worst nightmare kind of scenarios where a couple friends and I had just finished studying at the library. It was late at night and I was walking home, and a truck full of white boys pulled up to us. Right. And at the time, I wasn't scared. I actually even approached the vehicle thinking, like, oh, here are some nice college students. They're probably lost. Let me help give them some directions. That's probably why they pulled over. Hey, excuse me. And I went over to their truck and said, yeah, can I help you? And they started actually making some lewd remarks at me about my breasts. And then they started mocking me. I think they had targeted me and my friends because I was a group of international students. We all were Asian. And it made me realize that they were making those remarks and mocking and making a fake Asian accent because they had targeted me for my identity. They really was like, oh, here's this unsuspecting group of Asians. They probably are all international students. They don't speak English very well. It was an opportunity to just maybe humiliate us or make fun of us and for their own entertainment.
For their own
Um,
entertainment, yeah.
yep. And when I realized that they had targeted me based on my race and my gender, the first thing was I got pissed. I cussed at them. And I think they were taken aback. Oh, wait, this chick understands English. She's cussing at us. And so they sped off and then turned their truck around. And I was like, holy crap, this is where I'm going to get harmed. I just cussed out these white guys. They're totally going to harm me. Thankfully, I wasn't harmed, but they did throw like some firecrackers at us. I went back to my apartment and just bawled my eyes out. I was with a group of friends. They were all international students, and they didn't really understand the social political context of what just happened. And I did. I knew that I had been targeted because of my gender and my race. And I felt so dehumanized after that exchange. And it changed my worldview because up until that point, I think I would have believed that the United States was a meritocracy. Like my parents were refugees and America was supposed to be the land of opportunity. In school, I was a good student and really rewarded for my academic achievements. My teachers were really encouraging. And I was a first generation college student. So I was like, this is it. My parents said this is the land of opportunity. They said if you work hard in school, you're going to get into college and all of these opportunities are going to open up for you. And so up until that point, I really felt as a young person, I made it. I did what I was supposed to and I made it and I'm here and I'm just as accomplished and I deserve to be on this college campus just like anybody else. I was so devastated when that happened. And I went to my mentor, Alex Hines. He was one of the few, if not only the only Black man on campus who was also the director of the Inclusion and Diversity Office. And I told him about my experience. Um, and he was really sympathetic. And then he also told me that my story was really common, that this had happened on campus before, that students of color had experienced harassment, not only on campus, but also in the broader community. And I also quickly found out that even though I felt so super harmed by this experience, it changed my life, that there was no recourse, no way to heal or even address this. I considered this a hate crime because I was like, I knew I was targeted because of my gender and my race. And under federal and criminal definitions, this was not considered a hate crime. Like I had went through that conversation with campus security. I went through that conversation with Mr. Hines and other campus departments, and there was nothing to do. And I felt so gaslit by this. I was
Mm,
like, here in my bones, I knew that something terrible had happened, but the university and the law was telling me nothing terrible had happened under their definitions. And so therefore nothing could be done. And that really set the stage for me. I had other students then come to me and telling about their experiences as well. They were being told to go back to their country while they were shopping. There were LGBTQ students telling me that they were being harassed in their dorms, like the F word was being written onto their whiteboards. Their dorms were being targeted essentially. And this then led me into organizing, even though I didn't know it at the time. I was like, I'm a coordinator. I'm just coordinating all of these things and trying to amplify it. And while I was on campus, there was already a group of LGBTQ students on organizing for a safe space, which in I think the LGBTQ space means a really specific thing, right? A safe space parameters and what does that mean? What does it mean to support a safe space was really specific. And I joined to support that movement. I think at the time I didn't really understand what safe space meant. In an LGBTQ context, I identify as like heterosexual, cis. I didn't quite understand what that meant, but I knew that between the LGBTQ students and students of color and students who really just spoke any other language, we didn't feel like we belonged. We didn't feel
mm,
like the climate was creating a space where we felt like we could be our authentic selves. And we organized a protest during our school's reaccreditation week. So for folks who are familiar with the higher education space, accreditation is like essentially an association comes to your school and says, yes, this is a legitimate institution. They have the authority to issue out diplomas and degrees and all that stuff. And during our school's reaccreditation week, they were getting reaccredited. And we asked all these student clubs on campus to submit letters of support for a safe space, for the creation of a safe space on campus. And one of the things I did was like compile a ton of research and data and on students of color and their sense of belonging. And then we submitted all of our reports and letters to the university leaders and also spoke in front of our university student government. And then we were like loud and visible when all these accreditation professionals were like walking through. They could see that we were trying to stage a protest. There were students who were sleeping out the campus lawn. And it was such an incredible experience for me. Ultimately, our school was reaccredited, but there were really strong recommendations for university leadership to work on improving campus climate for LGBTQ students and students of color. Um, and in the following years, there was a DEI summit for students to discuss their experiences on campus. And that meant eventually we were allocated a space on campus, which we called the Knowledge, Empowerment, Advocacy, and Pluralism Center. It was a mouthful, but we shortened it to Keep Center. And we also got institutional commitment to create a VP of DEI and an ethnic studies department for the school. It's been amazing because I wasn't around when some of this stuff happened because the 4-year cycle, I think it's easy for universities leaders to wait for students to cycle out. But it was amazing to me to look back at this. This was my origin story. This got me into social justice advocacy work. It got me into organizing work. And I still get to hear stories about the progress that the university is making because I run into alumni or staff who still work at the university. And so it's been amazing. There's still more work to be done, I think, but that's the beginnings of my story.
You talked about thinking that America was this meritocracy and, oh, I followed the script. I did all the right
Oh, yeah.
things. I'm listening to you when you say, hey, maybe these folks need some directions. Let me get out to help. And you have
Yep.
this experience where you're targeted, you are harassed, and institutionally, the messaging is there's nothing there. What did it feel like for you to move through that moment and turn that into your activism and building coalition with others and bringing groups together to get these things passed at the university? What did it feel like while you were working with others to get that done?
That's such a good question. I think after the initial moment of helplessness, working through all those emotions, I think the next emotion that came up for me was like, I got angry.
Mm,
And that fueled my work for a really long time. I was really angry. I kept showing up with anger. I remember calling my sister and just sobbing, and I couldn't get over the fact that I had been targeted simply for my identity. I thought I was somebody who was living with my heart on my sleeve. Of course, I followed the script. I was the sum of my accomplishments, not my identity, not my visible characteristics. We all learn about MLK in school, judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. I really believed in that. And I'm sure I went to school with teachers who really believed in that too, or would have wanted me to believe that. And so I felt so sad and helpless. There was a part of me that I had to grieve that part of that worldview, that really simple and nice worldview. And the next thing I felt was just anger that, wait, this terrible thing had happened. And you're telling me that there's no justice really to be had, whether that was just validation or healing. And the other thing too is like around validation, there's like a careful nuance I have around that is that it's one thing to feel validated and acknowledged, yeah, that terrible thing happened to you and it's not your fault. You didn't deserve that. But then there was also this sense of I also got this weird like pity validation of when I was talking with like campus security or like other adults around me that were like camp university leaders. There was also this sense of pitying, like, you poor thing. I can't believe that happened to you. As if I don't know, like I can't really explain it. It just didn't feel right. So then I was really angry. And I actually leaned into my angry identity for really a long time because I was hearing rumors that university leaders could not understand why I was so angry. Like they were literally calling me the angry student, the angry Asian chick. I had been hearing rumors about that. I went to a really small campus. Like,
mhm. And
so
word travels.
right? And it comes back around. And so they were like, we can't understand these students. And I think that's still part of the campus culture, still part of the local culture there. Is like, we have an office of inclusion and diversity. What else do you want? We've allocated resources and we have a director there. We have this space where like students of color to go talk about their thing. What else do you want? This is as good as it's going to get. And so I got really angry about that because I was like, I knew that because of the life experiences that I had, that was so different than the life experiences they had. Most of the campus leaders, I will say, were born and raised in the same town. I went to a rural university in Minnesota.
Mhm.
And And so a lot of the folks were born and raised there and then ended up working for the university. Like they went to school at the university, loved it, and then became leaders. So I think there was also this sense of there wasn't exposure to like the broader world. Like I think it was really easy to be isolated. So they couldn't understand, okay, what else do you want? You just need to get along. And I remember just again, I was angry, but in my private moments with my friends, I would just cry about it. I was like, I just want to be seen and I want to be acknowledged as like this powerful person, this really empowered person. And I didn't deserve this. And that actually the world needs to change. It's not me. I don't have to sit here and accommodate this, but the world needs to change.
Mhm.
Oh,
As I'm listening, particularly you sharing about the role of anger, I'm just thinking about some of my own experiences. I was talking about this with a different guest too, but one of the quotes in some of my experiences that really resonates with me is James Baldwin's to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in this state of rage almost all the time. And it's not just that what happens to us, but also he said because of the ignorance or criminal indifference on the part of white people to act, to do something about it, to care. And in your sharing, you're hearing that university officials, leadership aren't understanding. Like, why is this a problem? Why are you so upset about this? I'm thinking of some common parallels to this idea of the ignorance to your experience. And I'm thinking there's some disconnection there. You're disconnected from that experience. The piece that I'm also moved by, as Baldwin goes on to say, the work then is to channel that rage in a way that it does not consume you, channel it in a way that it doesn't totally consume you. And I've heard you share that you've realized in some ways that for you, that anger, it fueled you for a while, but it came to a point where you were realizing, at least in the way it was going, it wasn't sustainable.
yeah. I think that anger fuels one of the things that I'm learning about anger. So I'm trying to also learn more about my own emotions and getting in tapped with them. But one of the uses of anger is that it leads you to your sense of injustice. And that's not something to be discounted and valuing that. And then we live in a society that's actually really scared of anger, right? Not just in a society, but think about anger in our interpersonal relationships, right? Like at least in the family that I grew up in, right? It was almost like we were afraid to be angry with each other, right? And we had a hard time understanding each other's anger. So I see how anger plays out at multiple different levels and getting comfortable with anger within yourself, within your relationships, but also on a community and a national scale, right? We have to build the capacity to be able to hold our anger and understand what it's trying to tell us. And as I grew in my journey, I had to find other sources of fuel for this long march towards justice. One of the things that I did right after graduating from undergrad, because I was one of those students who went straight into graduate school. And while I was in graduate school, I did my thing again. I started organizing again because I found out that one of the buildings on campus was actually named after a KKK leader. I went to school out in Oregon. In Oregon, just like Minnesota, where I'm from, has a long history of they have this image of white liberalism, right? And one of the things people don't know about Oregon is that Oregon actually used to have the highest number of KKK chapters. Right? That was like a thing. It was like a great thing like people did, right? It was like joining the YMCA in Oregon. Like it was a social thing that you did. And so one of the buildings on campus was named after a KKK member. And I found out that this was widely known, but students hadn't really or not students, it was not really the responsibility of students to do this, but the university hadn't changed the name. And so I started organizing with graduate students on my campus as well as undergraduate students to get this name changed. And that also continued to fuel my sense of anger. I was like, why are these things not like change are these things changing on their own? Like, when it's so visible, right? The thing that happened to me, right, might have been like a one-off or for specific circumstances, but here I was at a larger institution, greater diversity of students that they were probably recruiting from and bringing students into. And so I was angry there, but I also found out that anger is like good for a sprint, but not for a marathon. There were students on campus that were also organizing for not only better policies to support students of color, but the thing about the school building was just one more thing. And while I learned that while social justice work will always feel urgent, it also needs to be sustainable. And so that was when I started burning out a little bit. While I had worked with some campus historians to learn about the origins of this building and all that stuff, I also felt like when I was student organizing as a graduate student, I was dismissed in a certain way. And interestingly, not from university leaders, but by other students. I was a graduate student, so technically I only had a 2-year commitment. I was there to get my degree and I'd be out. Whereas like undergraduate students, they had double the amount of time. But also, I think we were in a phase of activism where back in the day when DEI worked, there was a lot of affinity groups. There was a lot of, yes, we're all working towards justice, but it's not your job to do this, or you need to leave this up to like the Black students, is what I was told, right? It was
Okay.
like,
Okay.
didn't quite know. I was still fine. I didn't quite know how to respond to that because I was like, I'm doing this because I have this strong belief in justice. And I also believe that, yeah, Black student leadership needs to be recognized on campus because Black leaders are always the folks championing justice and liberation in its purest essence in a way. But I didn't quite know what to do with that. I was like, okay, this anger that I have about all these things is fizzling out because I'm being told that there's like kind of no room for me here. And so it made me pause and re-question, do I belong here? Is this my march? And I also like, do I get to define how I want to march towards justice? Or am I here to, I think there's times where you take direction from others, but it led a lot of questions. And you can see I'm still struggling
Yeah,
to
I was gonna ask you, at that time, where did you land, in terms of what you did, and then where are you now? Even as you're making meaning of this, as you're talking about it, where are
I
you?
at the time, I handed over the work. Like, I had worked with some campus historians. I had made it more publicly known about some of the research that had been compiled and, like, the need to change the names. I think I even helped write, I don't know, what are those things? An order or a decree or something for the faculty.
Like a list of demands or
Yeah, it was like it was not like a list of demands, because list of demands you can understand. It was more like a whereas we recognize and
Oh, yeah, let me see. It cou is it a degree? It's some kind of state resolution? Is it a resolution? Is that
yeah,
what they
a resolution. You're right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I don't remember what. I ended up writing a resolution. I wrote a resolution for the faculty government it's the faculty equivalent of the student government. So anyway, I wrote a resolution for them to adopt. I wrote a resolution, compiled all the research, and then because I was told like you need to actually let the Black students, especially the undergraduate students, lead this. I handed over all of it. I was like, all right, I'm gonna hand it all over. I handed it all over. And then I was like, okay, I guess I'm not meant to lead this work on the campus level. And so then I turned my eye towards doing more within my own department and convened like, what do they call it? Anti-bias, like listening session between professors and students. And anyway, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm not meant to lead this. Let me go focus on things happening in my department. And there's a lot of graduate students in this department, whatever. And at the time, I didn't even, my friends were actually more indignant than I was. Still, I don't know what the right thing to do is here, but I'm being asked to hand over all this stuff. And so here I'm going to do it. And my friend
Okay.
was like, "Well, you're the one who like did all this work and you're just going to hand it over." And I was like, yeah, I guess I'm not meant to lead it. So somebody else is going to lead it. Um, and now that I look back on it and how I think about it is I think that if I take the long view of like social justice movement, I was reading something by Angela Davis. I can't believe I'm going to forget her book. But one of the things that her book made me realize was that it was an amazing time and still is to be a student organizer between 2010 to 2016, which is like my
Mhm.
time span. There were so many movements happening, and there was the Occupy Wall Street movement that like raised our consciousness around like class and capitalism. There was the Black Lives Matter movement that raised our consciousness around like police brutality, policing, like the justice system, the injustice system. Like those were all the movements that like I was like soaking up and learning from. And then I look back on that moment, I was like, as a movement, we were probably still trying to find ourselves, right? In that time and space, folks still needed to grapple with their identities. Like Kimberly Crenshaw's work around intersectionality, people were still familiarizing themselves with those concepts of like multiple identities and therefore like multiple points of oppression and stuff like that. And so that's how I look back on it. I was like, that was a moment for me to also realize that we can't get to freedom by racializing ourselves in the same way that these like systems of oppression have racialized us or gendered us. I think it's important to understand identity, right? And understand your different identities. But nowadays, I pay a lot of attention to work by Ada Marie Brown, Raffo, like this amazing healing justice activist that's based in the Twin Cities, bell hooks and other folks like that. I think another thing that was introduced to me that really made a big difference was learning about the three pillars of white supremacy, which is how capitalism and white supremacy are advanced. And it's these three pillars around colonization, it's around imperialism, and it's around slavery. And that helped me understand all of our entry points into liberation might look different given our different histories, our different identities, but we have to understand the entire house and not just the one pillar that we're looking at. So that's how I think about it now is that there's a lot of um, entry points into justice work based on our identity and or personal histories, but it's also helpful to learn about the whole house and not just the one window that you're looking at.
It's helpful to learn about the whole house and not just the one window that you're
Yeah.
looking at. One of the ways that you are exercising, sharing, living into your justice work is through the creation of the Healing Timelines Project. Could you talk a little bit about the story behind its name? What inspired you to create it? And
Yeah.
were there any particular moments or reasons that supported you in deciding to move forward with it? That last part about with the story behind its name, what inspired you to create it? And then what sorts of realizations or moments inspired you to move forward with it? Realizing it is one thing, and then taking movement and actions towards bringing it to life is an extension of that.
Yeah, as you can probably tell from my social justice origin story, this passion for advocacy, for lifting the veil and all the shadows of oppression naturally led me into nonprofit work. My parents were always like instilling in me, like, no matter how educated you are, no matter how wealthy you are, what's actually valuable is how well you give back into your community. And so I wanted to make sure that my career gave back to community in a really impactful way. And so I was really drawn into nonprofit work in particular. And as I was doing nonprofit work, that led me to burnout. It led me to really deep burnout and also meeting a lot of different people who were probably at different points of the long march towards justice, is what I want to call it, right? Using LLK's work, where folks who had been doing this work for years and were like, this is great. And being young and green and fresh out of college, I was like, it's not great. It's not great yet. And trying to make sense of all of that led me to a lot of burnout, led me on my healing journey, really, because I thought it was enough to just dedicate all of myself to justice work. And I thought I would be fulfilled for that. So it was very self sacrificing. And when was totally burnt out, I was like, wait, like social justice work isn't supposed to feel like this. And so I went on my healing journey and realized it was actually a mentor who said to me after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. He said, I believe that any vision of liberation also has to include joy. And no one had ever said that to me. So when you talk about what was the emotion that sustained you through your work, right? It had been up until that point, it was anger and indignation and sadness. And so I had never thought about my activism through a lens of joy. I was like, what is it? What? Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying my ancestors did not sacrifice so that I could just feel like this all the time, feel sad and angry. They sacrificed in the hopes that I would one day feel joy. And so that really reinforced exploration of my own spirituality too. Because I think one of the things that I was thinking about through movement work was there probably still is this moment of like cancel culture, right? People caught making mistakes, saying horrendous things. And even looking back at my own origin story of those white boys who stopped me in their truck, I don't think I wanted them to be punished. I just wanted them to apologize. And I wanted the
Mhm.
university to acknowledge that nobody deserves to be treated this way. I don't think I wanted anyone on campus punished. And all of that to say is that that's what really pushed me to start the Healing Timelines Project as I was going through my own healing journey, as I was connecting to my own spirituality. I believe in a spirituality that's really expansive and really loving and allows people to show up as their full authentic selves with mistakes, with the humanness. That led me to the Healing Timelines Project. That was partially inspired by the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was
Oh,
it's so great.
okay.
And I was like, oh yeah, here is this woman and her daughter. They're traveling through multiple timelines, seeking a timeline in which they understand each other. Really touched me at the time. It-
Course.
I can't remember when it came out, but the timing is important just because I lost my mom and my grandma in 2021. And after losing my mom and my grandma, I had always had a complicated relationship with them. I don't even know if they would have really understood the justice work that I was doing, or why I was doing it. I think the dream was always that would one day understand why I was doing this work. But when I lost my mom and my grandma in 2021, and then I saw that film, it made me think about how can healing happen in this timeline that I'm in right now. And so that's where the inspiration for the name Healing Timelines Project came up, right? Because part of the journey too was understanding how trauma and oppression are connected. That's the crux of the Healing Timelines Project, is that trauma is so preventable. Trauma impacts everyone, and it's also deeply tied to our oppression and vice versa. And part of my journey was understanding, how did my mom and my grandma get this way? My mom was this woman who had really high expectations. I could see where I was taught perfectionism as defined by the characteristics of white supremacy culture. I was really taught that from my mom. She had very high expectations, like anything short of perfection was unacceptable. Perfection was doing your best. Anything
Hmm.
short of I'm doing your best. And then for my grandma was a real hard ass. And she was mean, right? She was this really tough woman. And I had to understand their trauma from war, right? As a project of US imperialism in Southeast Asia. Like, what were the traumas of war and how did they embody those things and then pass them on to me? And then how did that impact the way that I showed up? And so it was untangling all those things and then offering healing and forgiveness and space and grace for some of those things and how they showed up in our family. That's where the inspiration for the Healing Timelines project came. And it was interesting, around the same time that I lost my grandma and my mom, it was also like when I first became a mother. So my son was born in 2019. My mom and my grandma were still around. And it was amazing to see them become grandparents and great grandparents. So I was like, wow, where is this like soft, like gentle mom coming from? I've never seen this woman before, right? Wow.
I hadn't experienced that before. Who is this person?
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was amazing. But then when my daughter arrived, my mom passed in 2021, and then my daughter came in 2022. I reassessed and was like, healing doesn't just happen backwards in time. It can also happen in like future traveling. And so what are the ways that I have to change? What are the ways that I want to show up as like the new matriarch of my family so that like healing can happen? And so anyway, that's like the impetus of the Healing Timelines project, is offering healing not only looking backwards, but also in this current timeline, and also looking forward to the future lineage that I may have and my descendants, and wondering, what could this spark? Yeah, we could, the long march towards justice doesn't just have to include pain and anger and sadness. There are moments of joy. And that's the thing that we're looking for. Like, how can that be the, I don't know, like the baseline, the state that we're in?
Hmm. And you mentioned forgiveness too.
Yeah, the forgiveness is current work. So things, not just that
Current
I
right
have,
now, y'all.
one of the teachers that I listen to a lot is a Buddhist teacher who's passed. His name is Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Vietnamese Buddhist teacher, was alive during the Vietnam War. I think he was advocating in France for peace for Vietnam and everything that was happening. He talks about forgiveness as also a form of time traveling. He says people often think that we can't change the past. And so they hold a lot of anger and resentment over the past. And he actually challenges us to think that you can actually change the past, because when you recall those memories and you speak to that memory and say, Mom, Dad, you were unskilled in loving me. Love is a skill that we can build. And in that moment, you were unskilled. And so you can offer forgiveness for that moment and saying, and just noting that you were unskilled and this could have been better. We didn't know enough at the time. So that's what I'm exploring now, is like, how do I go back to those memories, right, where I felt harmed, and offer forgiveness and state like, I, as a child, like I didn't deserve that, or That was like a really unskilled way of showing me that you loved me. And so, like, how can I offer forgiveness? But what I am discovering about forgiveness, though, is that forgiveness is not the end state. The next stage that I'm working on is like after you've done forgiveness, you actually have to learn how to trust again,
Mm.
especially if you decided that you're going to stay in relationship with these folks. And for me, I've decided I want to stay in relationship with my mom and my grandma and my dad. So like, how do I learn if I've forgiven? How do I learn to trust again?
Mm.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with my journey in terms of forgiveness and trust.
So learning to trust again, that felt pretty significant for you and for folks who are listening who may also be in that space of learning to trust in relation to what we're talking about here. What are some things that you found helpful so far? Like I know you mentioned this current work. So this is currently happening. This is
Yep.
being created in real time, everyone. But what are some things so far that you found helpful for yourself that perhaps others through listening, it might just provide some things to think about that you hadn't
Yeah.
considered yet?
It's really significant, and my wording is really intentional. When I said I still want to stay in relationship with my mom and grandma,
That's right.
I believe that I still hold a relationship with them even though they've passed on. Like, I don't think that I know they're not here in the physical world with me anymore, but we're still connected spiritually. And so I've decided that I'm gonna build on that spiritual relationship. Like, my mom's not here physically anymore, yes, but I'm still gonna have a spiritual relationship with her. So that's the part of it. And what I've discovered in my relationship with my mom, especially now, like, after the first, like, 2 years really of just, like, grieving the loss and then making the conscious decision to continue to have a spiritual relationship with her, I was, like, finding myself really scared to trust her because when my mom passed, one of the commitments I made to myself was that in my grief, I was not gonna wear rose-colored glasses about my mom's character. Wanted to honor the complex person she was, and I didn't wanna gloss her over until she was the perfect mother and there was nothing wrong, because then it meant I couldn't really learn anything from the relationship that we had. So I wanted to honor the complexity of who she was in her human self. And so in trying to honor that commitment, I was like finding myself like sometimes when folks were say like, I really miss like my siblings in particular, because they also lost my mom. I was afraid of losing her over of just like when I said I miss her, am I only missing the good parts or do I miss like the entire
Ah.
the relationship that we had. And if I missed the entire complicated relationship that we had, does that mean I'm also a glutton for punishment? Because there were also some really bad and harmful and tough things that we went through.
Mm.
And just making room for that complexity and like of who she was, it also made me scared to trust. I think once you've uh, experienced trauma, intergenerational trauma, and you're working on healing, it can also make you feel scared to get traumatized again. You're not sure, can I trust this person again? And that's where I found myself was like, can I trust my mom again? Even though she's not here physically, if I build a spiritual relationship with her, am I opening myself up to harm again? Am I going to get hurt again? And that's when I realized that because my mom's not here anymore, I'll never have closure over the relationship. And that's actually okay. I think I'm making space for that.
Mhm.
Even if she was here and she could say, Jopa, I am so sorry. You're absolutely right. I was unskilled in loving you. I want to do better. Actually, that's not the end of the conversation. When I was thinking about that, I was like, that's not the end of the conversation. Even if she owned up to everything that had happened in our relationship, the work was learning how to trust her again. It's like, how do
Mhm.
I how do I trust her again? And one of the things that I'm learning a lot around love, the spiritual aspects, right? And this relates to social justice work too, right? For me, love is both accountability and forgiveness, or accountability and grace. And so how do you have those two things together? Because love without accountability is just manipulation, right? And
Mm.
that love without grace is also a form of manipulation, right? It's a form of coercion. And those are the things that I'm, still thinking about in my social justice origin story. I also think that the interpersonal is a reflection of the institutional, and the institutional is a reflection of the interpersonal. So I'm always constantly traveling between two spaces to understand what does this mean in my social justice liberation work? What does this mean in my interpersonal relationships?
Always traveling between those 2 spaces. They're interconnected, they inform one another. What do you think about when it comes to ensuring that over time, the Healing Timelines project remains aligned with its core values, its core purpose and mission?
I'm still figuring that out. I think one of the things that I'm thinking about with my platform is how do they stay aligned with my values? And also, how do I pay attention to the in almost like insidious ways that oppression can show up in our passion projects, right? So, like, one of
Oof.
the things I talk about
Mm.
with you all the time, Mondo, is
Yeah, here we go.
yes, I have a family to provide for,
That's
right? And
right.
this project can be a way I could monetize it in a way that allows me to provide for my family. But I also know that this type of healing is needed in my community, and I don't want to sell people's healing back to them. And so, how do I navigate this in a way where, yeah, I feel like as a facilitator, as a guide, as a healer, I've learned some things and I want to honor that knowledge, that the lineage of knowledge, essentially, right, that I've gained and I'm following and sustain myself and my family, not be self sacrificing. But also, again, I don't want to repackage my people's healing back to them. And so those are the tensions that I am navigating right now. And I think that being honest with those tensions and making those tensions explicit is one way that we make sure that we stay on course, I guess, in a way. When we name the tensions, we allow ourselves to let go of perfectionism and say that there's never going to be a perfect choice, right?
Mhm.
There's never going to be a perfect choice, but if we can articulate and explain why we're making certain decisions, and then also, I don't want to get stuck into a founders syndrome situation. I want the project to be fluid. I want it to be relevant for the folks that come after me. And so, what does it mean to design something like that? Yeah, I think for me right now, it's like naming my values, understanding what are the tensions that I'm navigating, and also making those strategies and those decisions really explicit and clear can really help make sure that it's still relevant and on course for folks.
Now, for folks who are listening, could you add some color to Founders Syndrome?
Founder syndrome, working in the nonprofit and philanthropic space, right? The way I think of it is like when you start something, it becomes your baby. You have all this emotional attachment towards it. And yeah, I'm trying to make sure that I'm also navigating my own attachment to my
Oh, yeah.
project,
Oh,
being
yeah.
really aware of my emotions, making sure I have a lot of emotional maturity and emotional awareness around like, why did I start this project? And also understanding this has to do a lot with parenting. Again, I'm jumping all over the place, but this
Yeah,
is not
go
my brain.
for it. Go for it.
One of the things I was learning when I became a mom was that even though your children come through you, right, they are not of you. Your children are not an extension of you. They come through you. And that is something that I want to think about, whether it's with my children, who I love very much, a project, which are like a child in some ways. That's why I said it's your baby. My project came through me, but is not of me, right? I may be able to offer a personality or a certain aspect of it, but I don't actually feel like it just belongs to me alone. Like it comes through me. And so like how do I not suffocate it by trying to control this project or control my children, which will make everybody very miserable, but ensuring that I am allowing something to come through me and I'm caring for it in a way that allows it to still express itself in its most authentic form. So that's how I think about founder syndrome, is when you start trying to control things because it is your baby, it's your passion project, it was your idea. But yeah, honoring that idea of understanding that if the idea came through you, it's not of you.
Yeah, through you, it's not of you. And in that, I feel like there's at least what I'm taking from it. In that, I feel like there's also a commitment then to growth and learning and change and thinking about what the capacity of this thing could be, even if something might come up that might be beyond what I might have originally dreamed. I'm giving this to the people in a sense. And so sometimes the usefulness of it or the use of it may even grow beyond what we might originally envision.
It allows for this value of co-creation, and that's something I value a lot, is co-creation. And so that's exactly right.
What are some things that you'd hope that listeners would learn or take away from today?
One of the things I was talking about was connecting to a lineage or a movement. One kind of resonates for you. I think that a principle that I love in facilitation that I've adopted into my own life, right, is that possibilities exist because you exist, right? And our ancestors and our descendants are waiting for us to leave our past, present, and future. That's why I think of the Healing Timelines Project as really healing across timelines. Um, I believe that our healing work must be dual. It is about, yes, it's going between the interpersonal and the institutional. It's about dismantling our collective oppression and tapping into a higher vibration or a higher being or way that leads us to liberation and sovereignty. It's something that I would want listeners to take away from the story is just understanding how interconnected everything is and that it's actually traveling in between spaces where we learn the most about our own liberation and sovereignty.
How can listeners learn more about the Healing Timelines Project, and where can we find you and all
Yeah,
that?
I have a lot of dreams for the Healing Timelines project, but I'm only one person. So most folks can find me through my Instagram page right now. It's Healing Timelines Project. Right. As just being like a one woman show, it's easiest for me to just manage one platform at a time. But ultimately, the dream for the Healing Timelines Project is to one day have a website and other social media pages. But right now, I'm only on Instagram, and that's where I'm posting a lot of my resources and thoughts.
Finish this statement. True social justice is possible when
True social justice is possible when we decolonize our healing practices so we can create a more liberated future for ourselves and our community.
my approach to social justice is shaped by.
My approach to social justice is shaped by being the by my relationships, being an older daughter, the oldest daughter, being a mother, being a wife, being a friend, being a colleague.
Any thoughts you have on why social justice origin stories are important and us being in relationship with our stories?
Yeah, you sent me some of the questions to reflect on beforehand, and I loved doing that because one of the things I keep thinking about is that progress can only be seen looking backwards. And when we're in the moment, it's so hard to see progress. And when we're looking at the mountain we're trying to climb, there is no way to see progress. And what I loved about retracing and reflecting on my social justice origin story was being able to see all the progress that had been made. I was like, you're right. Like when I was a college student, there was no ethnic studies department, but I just ran into a professor who told me I'm one of 2 professors that are teaching, ethnic studies at my alma mater now, and I was like, "Wow, that's amazing. I would have never thought that was possible." And the second thing that I think about is whose stories get told, whose origin stories get amplified, right? And I think that the types of origin stories that get amplified today aren't necessarily reflective of this liberated, sovereign future that we want. Especially when I think about my own cultural background as like a Hmong woman. I think about many Hmong women's origin stories, their leadership is buried, right? And we don't know any of those stories. And so when a young person or a descendant is looking for inspiration or even just proof that it can be done, that becomes really difficult. And so that's what I loved about reflecting on this. I was like, here's an opportunity to, right, really share my story and have it documented so that somebody out there's in the future or currently can look back on and be like, actually, yeah, progress can be made, and these are the types of origin stories that make a big difference in the trajectory of somebody's life.
You've named some folks throughout our conversation, but just taking a pause, if there's a person or some people who've had a big influence on your life and your journey, doesn't have to be exhaustive, but if you would like to name anyone, and then what part of that influence do you carry with you today?
The first thing that comes to mind is I'm just constantly inspired by Black queer feminists. I think they have shaped so much of my ideas around liberation and what is possible when we live into a Black queer feminist future. So I'll also name that. I feel like that's such a broad blanket statement, but
It's okay.
that's
Yeah, it's whatever you have.
yeah, that's exactly what I think about. I also think about now my Hmong woman identity. And one of the books that I read that really changed my life, and I'll say it's a very academic book, so I don't know if it's for everybody, but that when I read it and where I was made a big difference was I read the book called Claiming Place on the Agency of Hmong Women. And that is a collection of essays and whatnot written by very academic essays written by Hmong women and other like Hmong academics who might not even identify as Hmong about Hmong women's role in Hmong culture, in Hmong society. It helped me shape my ideas around what is Hmong feminism, right? And how does it shape the way that I can advocate for change and justice in my own community, in the relationships that I have within my community. That's been a book that I keep going back to because, yeah, I think, yeah, who are the lineage of Hmong women that I want to follow? And what have this lineage of Hmong women been desiring their whole lives? What does that mean?
And of the people and groups that you've named in terms of folks that were influential to you in your journey, if they or if folks who are also in the within those groups that you might not know personally, but if they came across this and you had the opportunity to say something to them in terms of gratitude or just speaking to the impact of that influence, what might you say if you had that opportunity? In case somebody's listening and if it helps for context, for me with this particular question, when I thought of it, even pulling into my own experiences, there are folks that I think of even now who I would thank. Some I am able to thank now through messaging or phone call, what have you, or and then some I am not. And I think it's something powerful about being able to share that impact if we have the opportunity in whatever ways we can, realizing everybody communicates differently, has different languages in terms of how they receive care, but I think it's something powerful about letting folks know the impact if we're able to.
Yeah, I think what I would say is just, first of all, thank you so much, right? Thank you for your ideas, your spirit, that that's always carried through. I also want to say thank you for not giving up because as I'm in the middle of my journey now and working through all the feelings that I'm having, anger, sadness, helplessness, like my ancestors, this lineage of Black queer feminists, of queer feminist Hmong folks, thank you for not giving up and believing in my future. Because I'm only here because they believed in a future that may not have been possible at the time. I'm just also really grateful for the trust that they have in me to carry on this work, to be part of this lineage. That's amazing. And it's a responsibility that I don't take lightly. So, yeah, just like deep gratitude. Thank you for continuing to go on. Thank you for trusting me with this work. Thank you for your spirit.
Speaking of the future, and I love how you phrased our descendants are waiting for us to weave our past, present, and future. Years from now, for future generations who would come across you sharing your story, was there anything you'd like to pass on to them? Any knowledge, any wisdom, any advice? Is there anything you'd like to pass on to them, or what would you want them to know?
I had a sense where you were heading with this question, and the thing that actually comes to mind is the same thing that I expressed gratitude for earlier. I would
Okay.
tell folks who are coming after me is I trust you, right? Is I trust you with this. And let that trust express itself in whatever way it needs to be expressed. Yeah. 'Cause if someone looking at the Healing Timelines project one day and wondering, yeah, how do we continue to heal timelines in 4060? I would hope they would look back at an archive of this and know that I trust you. I trust you to carry on this work. I trust that it will be expressed in a way that feels really aligned and still relevant.
Thank you so much for sharing with me today, for sharing with the listeners. It's just something about making our experiences accessible. It has a way to give voice to things that folks were feeling and perhaps they might not have expressed it yet, or give that validation to folks who were experiencing something similar and just really aiding and supporting folks and realizing that, hey, I'm not alone in this. So thank you so much for the gift of your time, the gift of your sharing today. Thank you so much, Jopa.
Thank you. I loved this. And I love just like even the intentionality of this framing around social justice origin stories. Cause one of the things I'm learning, right, is that identity is not analysis. So I loved that have an origin story around social justice is like really specific and it's not exclusive. So thank you. I had such a great time and I loved all your questions. It was so wonderful to be able to reflect.
Jopa Lee, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Social Justice Origin Stories there or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch video episodes on YouTube at Social Justice Origin Stories, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Video episodes are also available on the project website, socialjusticeoriginstories.com. Follow the project on Instagram at Social Justice Origin Stories. I'd love to hear about how you're engaging with the stories. Share your thoughts at socialjusticeoriginstories.com/contact or by emailing stories@socialjusticeoriginstories.com. To support the work of Social Justice Origin Stories, consider becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this research going and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories to learn more and to make a contribution. Again, that's patreon.com/Social Justice Origin Stories. You can start or stop anytime. Social Justice Origin Stories is edited, hosted, and produced by me, Rolando Tompkins Jones. Many thanks to our storyteller this week and the many storytellers who have contributed to this project. And thank you for joining me this week. Take care.